Hi everyone, today we're going to look at an asset valuation calculation for a commercial building in Sydney, Australia. If you have a floor allocated to co-working under a management style agreement. And this came up because I was speaking to a very established valuer within our office on the conundrum of asset valuations when it comes to co-working spaces under non-traditional leases, but the value that it brings to the building, blah, blah, blah. We kind of gamed out a few scenarios, and I think this one makes a lot of sense if it's a new development, if it's a new building, and you're setting the rents of that asset and trying to figure out what you need to put into it to really differentiate it and make it sticky for tenants. So I figured I'd kind of map this out for you, as you will, based on the conversation I had. So there's a 14 floor building, let's call it circa 21,000 square meters. We'll say level one is co-working. And this is under a management agreement, okay? And that's what, 1,500 square meters, which is less than 10% of the building, which is always nice when it comes to valuations. And the rest of the floors, 14, 13, 12, blah, 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 they're all traditional leases. So a very traditional asset, except for that one floor under a management style agreement. And each of the floors are around circa 1,500 square meters. Now, we're going to assume that this building is $800 net rent, and I'm really dumbing down the valuation calculation for this just so that we can follow the nuance of what the co-working management agreement structure could do to it. It's very windy today. If you hear that wind, I'm sorry. So if we have an 800 net rent and we have a 5% vacancy allowance when we do this calculation for the value of the building, we've got about, and this is traditional, right? This is without the co-working. So 800 times 21,000 times 95. We've got about 15.96 million in NOI. And then we'll use a 5.5% cap rate in Sydney, Australia. So you divide that by 5.5%. And we're loosely sitting on a $290 million asset, okay? And that's if you were doing it all traditional, perfect world. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky when you have a management agreement, because valuers like to value based off historical data, not future. So I still think we're about 5 years away from a valuer looking at what co-working has actually done for a building to then be able to go, okay, we can value this forecasted income as is. But right now, if I go very conservative, that co-working floor, the way it would be valued would be, so if I line this off, the co-working floor, normally when under a management agreement structure and you partner with someone, they'll show you a forecasted rent of what they intend to hit after the first year. After ramping up, for a 12 to 15 month period. And that usually might be a slight premium to the rent. So instead of targeting the 800 net rent, they might be forecasting for 850, right? Which is great because there's value in the flexibility, the amenities that co-working space has. However, a valuer might look at it and be like, because it's variable income, we might hit that with a 20% discount. And that's kind of where it gets a bit iffy in terms of the asset valuation taking an impact because it's a value, because it's under a management style agreement, right? Because suddenly that floor, even though it's just one, is now no longer being valued at 800 net. It's now, in this scenario, looking something like, 680. It's about 680, is that right? 850. 850. Yeah, 680 rent, right? And let me just take this opportunity to say, if you are going to go to the effort of doing this and partner with someone and kind of look into the management agreement structure, I think you really need to be able to look at a partner that is really going to tailor that floor to really add value to the rest of the floors. So it can't be an off-the-shelf product offering that's pushing a management agreement down your throat just because it's a favorable deal structure for them. You need to see something out of this, because what I'm about to show you is, okay, well, hypothetically, if we apply that value in DIP, what's the actual loss across that whole building? And then how can we fill that if you're if you're having a new development right now? So what does that loss actually look like? Well, we can calculate it out. If 1950, 19,500 square meters of that asset, so the 13 floors, not the co-working floor, is across the 800 net rent, and then times 95% because that's including the 5% vacancy allowance. So, when you value the building, it's never going to be always full. That's the downtime being accommodated. You've got about 14.82 million in terms of value. And then the actual co-working floor itself, it's 1,500 square meters. You times it by the 850 that they're forecasting, but then the valuer might be like, hey, you know what? Because even though we've looked around the area at other co-working operations and they look pretty good, because this is forecasted, and I'm really dumbing this down, we're going to apply a 20% discount. I've done co-working partnerships with assets where we've only seen a 10% discount when it was valued, but let's go with 20%. You're looking at a $1.02 million value of that floor. And then if you divide it out by the 5.5% cap rate, you're kind of looking at a $2.2 million decrease loss of that actual asset. So what we were looking at 290 million at the start, you're looking at, 287.8 million in terms of assets. So it's not a huge dip in value, but it's something, right? When you look at the actual floor. Now, the question now is, well, what does it mean to actually fill that gap? How do we actually fill that gap of that loss of 2.2 million? Well, when you actually calculate it out, you only need about $6.15 per square meter. It's a calculation I did before this video, something I prepared earlier, across the 13 floors, right? So that's less than a 1% gain in the rent per floor. So $806. So if you actually can justify, if we put a white label co-working operation on level 1 under a management agreement, even if we anticipate it's going to take a 20% hit from a valuer, we just need to make sure that the value of that amenity, that flex amenity, is tailored enough that we believe it's going to add enough value that the face rent of each of those floors is increased by $6, right? Whereas we've seen many scenarios where amenities beyond co-working, just very simple amenities, you could see a rent gain of $35 a square meter if you have the right cocktail of stuff in that building. And what I've been finding is that co-working operations, if it's a true partnership like the ones that we've recently delivered and do deliver, we make sure that the right amenities are in there to service the tenants. We also make sure that the on-site staff within that co-working floor can service the other tenancies or key tenants or spec suites in the building, blah, 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 can very, justly and fairly demonstrate an increase in the net rent across each of those floors. So if you actually see a modest $35 increase when you looking at your new building and what does the perfect world look like, and you apply the cap rate to it, that's a $12 million increase. So we're no longer talking about a loss of 2.2, it's now plus 12. And I actually think there's a lot of merit in defending the vacancy assumption. So defending the 5%. What are you doing as a landlord to have a valuer look at your building and constantly say, yeah, we can use the 5%. We're not going to increase that vacancy percentage to 6 or 7 or 10% because you're not doing anything about it. The buildings around in your area are slightly sitting more vacant than they used to. In a post-COVID world with hybrid work, vacancy is a bit more iffy in this market, so we're going to do that. I think putting something like this helps defend that vacancy rate. And if you want in a perfect world, imagine if you could argue, oh, we're going to decrease the vacancy rate to 3% because we're putting a bespoke co-working floor within the building that really takes care of tenants. It's not an off-the-shelf thing. It is an incubator for the building, so reduces the downtime for it. It's tenant first. The owner has a say on what customers get to use it because they want to have the right industries and customers that are too small to take a full floor right now go in there, all that kind of jazz. If you reduce that vacancy rate, even when you apply that value across the whole building with the cap rate, that's plus 5.7 million. So you see where I'm going with this. By putting this thing, the co-working management agreement floor, again, if it's designed correctly, your asset value is actually plus 17.7 million instead of a loss of the 2.2 million. So I know this is all financial jujitsu and valuations is more of an art versus a science. But why can't we use that art for good? Why does the musical chairs and the music only have to play for traditional style leases? I get it because it's rent and it's on paper. But these days, if that tenant's not happy or they're not paying rent, that lease isn't worth the paper that it's written on or signed on, right? So again, I think if the co-working floor is really tailored for the building, if it's a scenario like this where it's less than 10% of your asset, yes, in theory, that floor itself is going to be discounted in terms of its value. But if it's increasing the value of all of your other floors, well, there's a scenario where the value of the asset actually goes up. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. I'll leave you there. But let me know if you want me to dive a bit deeper into these vals calculations because I can have more conversations with my guy and we'll see where it goes, for science. I'll speak to you again soon.